She filed a police report and a protection order. She said, Mom, once he finds out what I did, he's going to kill me, Mom. And then he did. He selfishly took her and my grandson away from me.
She begged for help. She filed complaints. She told them he was dangerous. She told them he would kill her. And still they let him go. That is her mom testifying in court. Broken. Devastated. She has lost her daughter. A grandchild, all due to police negligence. How many more has to die before the police is held accountable? This is a story of Brooke Devinney, a 19-year-old pregnant woman from Columbus, Ohio, who was strangled to death by the man she had once loved, the same man she had been trying to escape for months. His name was Devon Blair, and his violence wasn't secret. She reported him multiple times. He held a knife to her throat. He threatened to bash her head in. He assaulted her in a car in her home in front of witnesses. He told her he'd kill her. She told the police. She told the courts. But what did they do? They gave him a bond. They gave him a second chance. And they left her alone. In May of 2024, after spitting on deputies and pleading guilty to assault and domestic violence, Blair was supposed to be behind bars. His bond was originally set at $11 million. But somehow it was reduced. In the judge's voice, I'm taking a chance. Don't disappoint me. He took the chance with him. For what price? The price of her life? The judge released him with an ankle monitor, a piece of plastic that was supposed to protect a pregnant girl from a man who had already tried to choke the life out of her. Let that sink in. He violated that monitoring. He broke the rules. And still no one came. Where were the police when he stalked her? Where were the consequences when he crossed boundaries? Where was justice when she was crying for help? This is the police stating that there were multiple arrest warrants for Devon Blair. They did not act. Now Brooke has to pay the price of their negligence.
He's got a felony warrant. It's essentially part of what we're doing is working a 50A.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would treat it the same way. 4623.
Yeah.
There he is. He's running. Hands up! You're under arrest!
With her life and that of her son. And now it's too late to ask Brooke. Because on June 16th, 2024, Devon Blair showed up at her home. And this time he didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He didn't leave. He strangled her. And when he walked out, he left behind two bodies, Brooke and her unborn son.
I think he's back at the house. He got some screaming inside.
I think you fucking killed my sister!
Where's your sister? Is he inside? Is he inside?
No, he dipped. I don't...
Where's your sister?
She's upstairs in her room. Upstairs to the left is the door. She killed her.
Hayden. So we ask you, Red Circle, what is the point of a restraining order that no one enforces? Red Circle, how many times must a woman be attacked before someone acts? Red Circle, who do we blame when the courts gamble with a victim's life and lose? Do you think the system failed her? Was justice delayed or just denied? Let us know in the comments. Speak their names. Brooke, Hayden, they deserve better. This isn't just another true crime case. This is a call for change. Because if Brooke Devinney, young, brave, pregnant, and pleading could be ignored, who's next? If you believe something has to change, backhand index pointing right, subscribe. Backhand index pointing right, comment. Backhand index pointing right, share her story. Because silence is what killed her.
Columbus Pleas, if you're in your sound off!
We'll just have to go slow. I'll hold this hallway. Or if you want to hold the hallway, I'll kick stuff around over here.
Columbus Pleas!
Okay. Thomas, please, if you're in here, sound off. 194. We haven't made it very far in here. Is there any canines close?
Honey, K9 Channel 3, K9 Channel 3.
It's just a garage.
Yeah. Problem, I drove one damn place.
I haven't ran into one this way yet, so. Must not be canine. Get down! Get on the ground! Hands behind your back! Stop. Let me get my order.
We deal with that later, okay?
191, he's gonna get a wagon over here. Keeps trying to get
Bro, I'm cool. Let me go, bro.
No.
You're the one that did it.
Any
Let me go,
wagons
bro.
that way, Ava's team.
Let me go, bro.
I think it's like Cottrell. It's right on the corner.
They found it.
Bro, let me go, bro.
No,
You want to slam your head and be stupid?
that's what happens.
We'll just help you make it good.
Okay, thank you.
Racist? I'm racist.
Let's see what this is being
For
like.
sure, right.
Where my legs go?
No. You want to do stupid stuff? You get a hobble and we'll put him on the side. Sarge, you get a hobble and we'll put him on the side. Got one.
Damn, tripping I get on my side, my damn self.
Ain't no one listening to you right now, guy.
This can go two ways. You can go on a stretcher and we can strap you down, or you can be a man and sit back here. It's your choice. Which one's it going to be?
Man, I didn't even want to be on these things creepy.
You going to be a man, or you need to go on a stretcher?
Are you gonna act like a child or are you gonna do it man up? Sit like that.
It's a yes or no question.
Man, it's in there enough. It's eight, or we're gonna have to scratch. Yes or no? Yes or no? Stretch her out.
Say he's standing or no?
No, he won't make a decision.
He's
So,
talking to me crazy.
you didn't answer the question.
Yes.
And we answered it for you. So we're gonna put you on a stretcher. So you don't
Stand him up.
I said yeah.
Ready? On your feet.
Use your feet.
Start
Y'all
walking.
gonna put me on a stretcher? Y'all gonna work?
Start walking.
Use your legs. Stand up.
stand up.
Y'all gonna work for it. I don't want to be on a stretcher. I want to make it easy for y'all. But
Oh, so we're gonna work for. We'll strap you to the stretcher then. I don't give a
what's your name?
Sands 2893.
What's your
Wednesday,
address?
Thursday, Friday. 120 Marconi Boulevard.
All the way left. Yeah, I should have busted my head on your thumb. I caught your butt.
One more side. One more side.
Side.
Side, guys.
Man, let me like this. Y'all freaking.
Yeah.
Y'all work together with this.
Wheels on that side.
Get on the head.
2 and 2. Ready? 2 and 2. Keep him on that side.
Don't worry about him. Don't be grab those caught. There you go.
Let them go first and we'll follow.
Hey, you got to be on my face.
Yep. I got you. Wheels down, it rolls to you.
Kick that air on.
Yes. Good.
I can ride.
All right. Get in there. You'll, yeah, but the cruise control.
Weston.
It started like any other summer morning. The sky was soft, the neighborhood quiet. And inside a home on Parkwood Drive, 19-year-old Brooke Devinney was just beginning her day. But less than an hour later, she'd be gone, strangled to death. And with her, the unborn son she was already in love with. His name was going to be Aiden. Brooke didn't die in a car crash. She didn't fall victim to a stranger in the dark. She died in her own home, at the hands of someone she used to trust, someone she had tried to escape. His name was Devon Blair, her ex-boyfriend, a man with a violent past and a documented history of abuse, a man who should never have been near her, a man who, despite every warning, every red flag, and every prior attack, was out on bond when he killed her. Let that sink in. He was free, and she paid the price. At 8:04 a.m., a relative inside the home sent a text to 911. It wasn't the first time someone had to call for help because of Blair, but it would be the last. Responding officers arrived quickly. They found Brooke unconscious, her body showing signs of trauma. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was already too late. She was pronounced dead at 8:45 a.m. Her unborn child, Aiden, died with her. In the span of 43 minutes, a mother and her child were silenced. Forever. Who was Brooke Devinney? She was more than a headline. She was more than a case number. She was 19 years old, just a teenager, with an entire life ahead of her. Friends say she was kind, thoughtful, and excited about being a mom. She had told people about baby names. She had dreams. And despite the trauma she had endured, she was trying to move forward. She had broken up with Blair. She had tried to get away. She had done what victims are told to do: report the abuse, seek help, document the violence. But in the end, it wasn't enough, because the system that promised her protection gave her silence instead, and that silence killed her. After the attack, Blair ran. He scaled the fence behind the house, fleeing into the neighborhood. For 5 long hours, he was on the run, a fugitive in the same city where he had just murdered his pregnant ex-girlfriend. Eventually, he was found outside a vacant house, not far from where he had left Brooke dying. His body showed visible scratches, and he had blood on his clothes. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of control, of rage, of repetition, because this wasn't the first time Blair had hurt her. Earlier that year, just months before the murder, Brooke had reported him for holding a knife to her throat. He had threatened to kill her, said he would bash her head in. It was documented. It was known. And yet, on May 7th, 2024, Blair was allowed to plead guilty to domestic violence and assault, including spitting on deputies. The court initially set his bond at $11 million, but it was reduced. He was granted release with electronic monitoring. He violated the conditions. Still, he remained free, and that freedom, granted not by mistake, but by policy, became Brooke's death sentence. In her final moments, Brooke was alone, and that truth haunts every second of this story. She had cried out. She had done everything right. But in a world where domestic violence is still too often minimized, Brooke became another statistic, another face on the news, another could have been. But she was never supposed to be a story. She was supposed to be a mother. Today, the house on Parkwood Drive is just another house in Columbus. The sun still rises there. The grass still grows. But inside those walls, something irreversible happened. A life was taken. 2, in fact. And no justice system, no sentence, no plea deal can bring him back. The clock struck 8:45 a.m. on June 16th, 2024, and time stopped for Brooke Devinney. This wasn't random. This wasn't sudden. This was a preventable death. So we ask again, how was Devon Blair, a known violent offender, out on bond? How was this allowed to happen? Why did the system gamble with a young woman's life? And most painfully, what would have happened if someone had just listened? Because Brooke did everything she could. And still, she died anyway. Before the headlines, before the courtroom, before June 16th. There was just Brooke, not the victim, not the pregnant teen. Just Brooke Devinney, 19 years old, bright, strong, trying. She wasn't famous. She didn't ask to be remembered this way. Brooke was like millions of young women across America. navigating life, navigating love, and learning to stand on her own. But behind her quiet eyes was a girl who had already seen too much and still chose to hope anyway. She was born and raised in Ohio. She loved music. She liked making people laugh. Her family describes her as someone who felt deeply, who wore her emotions openly, whether it was joy or pain. And when Brooke found out she was pregnant, everything changed. She wasn't scared. She was excited. She named her baby Aiden before she ever held him. She decorated. She planned. She told friends she was ready to be a mom. But what she didn't talk about, at least not loudly, was how much she feared the father of that child. Because she didn't want to be seen as broken. She wanted to be seen as brave. That's who Brooke was. Brave. Even after Blair threatened her with a knife, even after the court system wavered on protecting her, she kept going. She tried to move on. She tried to create a life for her and her baby. She went to appointments. She smiled for photos. She carried both the trauma and the hope at the same time, like so many survivors do, and she never let that fear define her. She wanted her child to have the love she fought for, but that dream died with her. In the weeks leading up to her death, Brooke stayed quiet, not because she was weak, but because she was tired. Tired of not being believed. Tired of watching her abuser walk free. She stayed strong for Aiden, for the idea that maybe things would finally get better, that maybe the worst was behind her. But it wasn't, and that's the heartbreak of this story. Not just that Brooke was killed, but that she was becoming a mother, a woman, a survivor. And we'll never know who she could have been. She was only 19. She had a name, a voice, a future. And now, she's just a memory. But in this documentary, she's more than that. She's Brooke. And this is her story. Before June 16th, 2024, before the murder, Devon Blair had already shown the world who he was. This wasn't his first act of violence. It wasn't the first time he hurt Brooke Devinney. And it definitely wasn't the first time he was warned to stay away. But no one stopped him. Devon Blair was 23 years old when he killed Brooke. But his violence started long before that. He was not a stranger to the police, not a stranger to handcuffs, and certainly not a stranger to Brooke's fear. In the months leading up to her death, Blair had held a knife to her throat. He told her he would kill her. He told her he would bash in her head. These weren't idle threats. They were documented, reported, real. And yet he remained free. Why? Because in early May 2024, Blair pleaded guilty to domestic violence and assault after another violent outburst, this time including spitting on law enforcement officers. The court initially set bond at $11 million, but something changed. Instead of keeping him in custody, the court reduced his bond and approved his release on electronic monitoring. He was fitted with an ankle bracelet. He was told to follow the rules. He didn't. Blair violated the terms of his release, but no one came to arrest him. No one stepped in. And on June 16th, he used that freedom to strangle Brooke Devinney to death in her own home. This isn't just a story about a man who snapped. It's a story about a man who was already snapping, repeatedly, and being allowed to walk away from it each time. The system saw the warning signs. They weren't subtle. They weren't hidden. They were screaming in police reports, in victim statements, in his criminal record. Still, nothing changed. So many people want to ask, why didn't she leave? But maybe the better question is, why wasn't he stopped? Because Brooke did try to leave. She tried to get help. She told people what he was capable of, and he proved her right. Devon Blair wasn't a mystery. It was a pattern of violence, of threats, of disrespect for the law, and disregard for life. And yet, in May of 2024, the system gambled with a young woman's safety. It bet against history and lost. Devon Blair was out on bond. He was violating terms, and he still had access to the woman he had once threatened to kill. That access ended 2 lives, and it never should have happened. The justice system is supposed to protect the vulnerable, but in Brooke Devinney's case, it didn't just fail. It collapsed because Devon Blair didn't kill in secret. He killed in plain sight after the courts had already seen what he was capable of. He was flagged. He was charged. He was warned. And yet he was free. Just 6 weeks before the murder, on May 7, 2024, Blair stood before a judge. He had pleaded guilty to charges of domestic violence and assault, including an incident where he spat on deputies, a clear sign of contempt for both the law and authority. Initially, Blair's bond was set high, $11 million. It reflected the danger he posed, the record, the threats, the violence. But then it changed, somewhere between paperwork and policy. His bond was reduced, and Blair was released under electronic monitoring. An ankle bracelet was supposed to keep him in check. It didn't. Blair violated his conditions, but no action was taken. No revocation. No rearrest. The system knew he had broken the rules, but it didn't act. Instead, it left Brooke Devinney, a pregnant 19-year-old woman who had already reported being threatened with death, completely exposed. What does it mean when a man known for violence can walk free, even after multiple violations? It means something is broken, not just in process but in priority. Brooke trusted that the law would protect her, that the charges she helped bring forward would keep him away, that his history of violence would finally be enough to hold him accountable. But instead, she watched her abuser walk out of jail and return to the world, as if nothing had happened. And the world let him. Blair wasn't monitored closely. He wasn't locked down. He wasn't stopped when he began to escalate again. And on June 16, 2024, he showed up at Brooke's home and did what he'd always threatened to do. He took her life and the life of her unborn son, because the system that should have protected her gave him the opportunity. This wasn't just a judicial misstep. It was a fatal policy gap, and 2 lives were lost in that gap. The question now isn't just why did he kill her? It's why was he even allowed the chance? It was supposed to be a quiet morning, but by 8:02 a.m., that silence was shattered by a desperate text to 911. Inside a modest home on Parkwood Drive, 19-year-old Brooke Devinney was being attacked. She was pregnant, 14 weeks along. The father of her child, Devon Blair, was inside the house, and he wasn't there to talk. What happened inside those walls is every family's worst nightmare. Brooke had trusted the system to keep her safe, but that morning she was alone. She didn't have time to run. She didn't have time to call for help. She was ambushed, strangled by the very man who once held a knife to her throat and promised to kill her. And this time he kept his promise. The emergency call didn't come from Brooke. It came from a relative in the home, someone who saw the violence unfolding and immediately texted for help. When first responders arrived, they found Brooke unconscious and unresponsive. She was rushed to the hospital. By 8:45 a.m., both she and her unborn baby, Aiden, were pronounced dead. The damage had been done. 2 lives gone in less than 45 minutes. Devon Blair didn't stay behind. He ran, vaulting over a backyard fence and disappearing into the neighborhood. For nearly 5 hours, he was on the run, not in another state, not across the country, just down the street. Eventually, officers located him outside a vacant house nearby. He was scratched. He had visible injuries, defensive wounds, possibly from Brooke fighting back. His clothes were stained with blood. He didn't deny being there. The evidence was undeniable. And yet, nothing about this felt like justice. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't a stranger in the dark. This was premeditated access, granted by a system that had already seen what Blair was capable of. Brooke was killed in her own space, in the place she should have felt safest. And she never got to cry for help. She never stood a chance. By the time the world reacted, it was too late. There were no final words, no goodbyes, no time, just a brutal act and the silence that followed it. When news broke that a 19-year-old pregnant woman had been murdered inside her Columbus home, the shock was immediate. But when the name Devon Blair followed, when people learned that he was out on bond despite a history of violence, the shock turned to anger, and then to heartbreak. Because this wasn't just a tragedy. It was a tragedy everyone saw coming. In the hours after the murder, the quiet residential street on Parkwood Drive was flooded, not just with police and media, but with neighbors, friends, and strangers trying to make sense of what had happened. Many had known Brooke. Some had grown up with her. Others only heard the story that day. But they all said the same thing. This didn't have to happen. at the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. The reaction was somber but pointed. Officials confirmed that Blair had a prior conviction for domestic violence. He had been arrested, pled guilty, and was awaiting sentencing at the time of Brooke's murder. He had also violated the electronic monitoring conditions of his bond. Despite all this, he had not been taken back into custody. One official described it as one of the most brutal domestic violence cases they had ever seen. And Brooke's death, they admitted, was entirely preventable. On social media, the story spread quickly. People weren't just outraged. They were devastated. They saw a young woman who had tried to protect herself, who had cooperated with police, who had done everything the system told her to do, and they saw how it failed her. Brooke's family, still reeling from the loss, chose to remember her not just as a victim, but as a mother who never got to meet her child. They spoke of her love for her unborn son, Aiden, of how excited she had been to become a mom, of the names she had already picked out, of the dreams that had been growing inside her, just like the life she was carrying. And now, there would be no baby shower, no first steps, no birthdays, just a dual burial, a casket too small for two lives lost. Community members and domestic violence advocates use the tragedy to highlight a growing crisis, a system that fails to adequately protect victims, especially those who are pregnant and at higher risk of abuse. Statistically, homicide is one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women in the United States. And yet, few safeguards are in place to protect them from abusive partners once a criminal complaint is filed. Brooke's story became a heartbreaking example of what happens when red flags are ignored. Vigils were held in her honor. Candles flickered in silence as friends and strangers stood side by side, some holding signs with her name, others with words like "Justice for Brooke" and "Never again." A neighbor who had seen Brooke just days earlier said softly, "She looked hopeful, tired but hopeful. I never imagined that would be the last time." As the days passed, the grief deepened, but so did the questions. Why was Blair allowed to remain free after pleading guilty? Why weren't the violations of his monitoring conditions taken seriously? Why weren't Brooke's prior reports enough? The answers were complicated. Policy gaps, delays in enforcement, an overwhelmed court system. But for Brooke's family, no explanation could undo what had happened. Their daughter, their granddaughter, their unborn grandson gone. In a statement, prosecutors vowed to pursue the maximum sentence. They made it clear Blair would be held accountable. He would never walk free again. But for many watching, it felt like too little, too late. Because accountability after a murder doesn't save lives. Prevention does. And Brooke's murder proved how deadly the absence of that prevention can be. Today, her name joins a growing list of women, young, pregnant, hopeful, who were silenced by the very people who once claimed to love them, and whose deaths could have been stopped if someone had acted sooner. Brooke Devinney didn't just die. She was failed by a system that saw the danger and stood still, by processes that gave her abuser one more chance and cost her everything, and by silence, deadly institutional silence, that spoke louder than all her cries for help. Justice is supposed to be swift. It's supposed to protect the innocent. It's supposed to prevent the unthinkable. But for Brooke Devinney, justice came too late. She never saw a courtroom. She never gave her testimony. She never got to hear the sentence. Because by the time the system acted, she and her unborn child, Aiden, were already gone. It took just over a year, from the day of the murder on June 16th, 2024, to the moment Devon Blair stood before a judge on July 21st, 2025. The justice system finally gave Brooke's family something that felt like resolution, even if it could never be enough. Blair didn't go to trial. There was no dramatic cross-examination, no drawn-out testimony, no media circus. Instead, in a Franklin County courtroom, he pled guilty, not to one charge, not to two, but to 6 serious felony counts. 1 count of strangulation, 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of felonious assault, and a separate domestic violence-related assault for a previous case where he spat on deputies during arrest. Each charge, each line read out loud in the courtroom, was a reminder of just how brutal and deliberate his actions had been. There was no remorse in his plea, no apology reported. just a cold acceptance of a deal made too late to save the lives already lost. The prosecution did not mince words. They called it one of the most brutal domestic violence murders they had ever handled. They described the killing as the final act in a long, violent pattern that had been documented, reported, and ignored. Brooke's life and the life of her unborn son, with the cost of that pattern being allowed to continue unchecked. When the sentencing came down, the numbers were heavy. 46 to 51.5 years for the murder-related charges, plus 2 additional years for the prior domestic violence assault. Total, 48 to 53.5 years in prison. A life behind bars. A fate sealed. But for Brooke's family, it wasn't enough to celebrate, because they knew what many victims' families come to understand. A prison sentence doesn't heal a wound that deep. The courtroom was still. No cheers. No applause. Just quiet. Because what do you say when your daughter's killer is led away in handcuffs? Only after she's been buried? What do you feel watching a man who once threatened her life finally be taken seriously? Only after those threats came true? There were no cameras allowed in the courtroom, but those who were there described the atmosphere as thick with grief. Some family members quietly wept. Others stared ahead in silence, stiff, resolved, as if holding on to composure was the only way to survive the moment. Brooke's mother didn't speak publicly that day. Neither did her father. But their absence from the headlines didn't mean their pain was silent. They had endured the unimaginable, and they had done so in a system that responded only after it was too late. For Devon Blair, the sentencing marked the end of his freedom. He will spend the next several decades behind bars. And under current Ohio sentencing guidelines, he won't be eligible for parole until he's well into his 70s, if ever. For some, that's justice. For others, it's simply consequence. Because justice would have meant Brooke still alive. Justice would have meant Aiden being born, crying, crawling, learning to walk. Justice came far too late. The courtroom is where it ended. But the failure started long before. The guilty plea didn't erase the prior calls for help. The sentence didn't undo the bond that never should have been granted. And the metal bars closing behind Devon Blair didn't bring peace. Because for every victim like Brooke, justice delayed is never justice served. It's a reminder, a warning, and a wound. This isn't just the story of a murder. It's a story of a system that looked the other way, until it was too late. It's a story of Brooke Devinney, a 19-year-old full of life and love, who did everything right. She reported her abuser. She cooperated with law enforcement. She pled for safety. And still she was failed, because when the courts released Devon Blair, a man with a documented history of violence, threats, and prior arrests, they didn't just release a person. They released a pattern. And on June 16th, 2024, that pattern ended in tragedy. Brooke was 14 weeks pregnant. Her son already had a name, Aiden. She had baby clothes. She had plans. She had hope. And yet, in a matter of minutes, everything was taken from her, strangled, silenced, forgotten by the very process that promised her protection. This was not an unpredictable crime. Blair had held a knife to Brooke's throat, threatened to kill her, spit on deputies during prior arrests, violated the terms of his bond, and was still allowed to remain free. These are not red flags. These are sirens. And they were ignored. So how does something like this happen? How does a known abuser walk the streets? How does a woman with a documented case history end up dead inside her own home? The truth is harsh. Because the system isn't built to act fast enough. Because electronic monitoring isn't a guarantee of safety. Because bond decisions often weigh rights over risk. And because the burden to survive is too often placed on the victim. In the wake of her death, public outrage surged. Not just because Brooke was young, not just because she was pregnant, but because her death was preventable. She should be here today, raising Aiden, building her future. Instead, her name is now a symbol, a painful reminder that doing everything right doesn't always keep you alive. Across Ohio and beyond, advocates for domestic violence survivors have renewed their calls for reform. They want tighter enforcement on bond violations, more aggressive intervention in repeat abuse cases, stronger protections for pregnant women facing domestic violence, and most of all, accountability, not just for the people who commit these crimes, but for the institutions that allow them to happen. Because Brooke's story is not isolated. In the United States, homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant women. Most often, the killer is someone they know, a partner, an ex, someone who once said, "I love you," someone who was already violent long before the final act. And in too many cases, those warning signs are dismissed, or minimized, or buried in paperwork, until it's too late. Brooke Devinney wasn't a statistic. She was a person, a daughter, a friend, a mother in waiting. She was strong. She was trying to rebuild. She wanted better. And she deserved it. Devon Blair is now behind bars, serving 48 to 53.5 years in prison. That sentence is final. But Brooke's absence is forever. There will be no first day of school for Aiden. No family photos. No what could have been. Only void and a long shadow of grief. SFX. A low hum builds gently behind the narration. A photo of Brooke and her ultrasound fades into view once again. Voiceover soft, firm. This documentary ends here, but the story doesn't have to. Let Brooke's name be more than a memory. Let her life be more than a tragedy. Let her death be the reason someone else lives. Ask yourself, what if we took every threat seriously? What if violations actually triggered consequences? What if we treated domestic violence not as a private matter, but as the public emergency it is? Because if we wait until after the funeral, it's already too late. Brooke Devinney cried for help. She followed the rules. She asked for protection.